The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
State Senator Denny Hoskins is having a busy 2019 session. In addition to trying to legalize video lottery terminals, the Warrensburg Republican is also trying to legalize and tax sports betting. Hoskins joins us on the latest edition of Politically Speaking to talk about his sponsored legislation and some of the issues that could be controversial on the Senate floor. Let's hit the music.
This is Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
Hi, everybody. This is Jason Rosenbaum of St. Louis Public Radio. Before we start this podcast, I do want to present a bit of a disclaimer. We had some technical difficulties with the Comrex Field Tap app, and that means the sound quality of our conversation with Senator Denny Hoskins is not really that pristine. It's still listenable, and the conversation was really great. We're still going to bring this episode to you. Without further ado, here's Politically Speaking with State Senator Denny Hoskins. And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining us through the magical power of the Comrex Field Tap app and the power of radio from Jefferson City, Missouri, our guest this week is
State Senator Denny Hoskins.
Welcome to the show. Your first time on the show. This is actually the second time we have interviewed a senator from the 21st District. Your predecessor, David Pierce, was kind enough to appear on the show. Just before we ask you a little bit about yourself and dive into issues, just explain what counties encompass your district.
Yes, I represent the 21st District. So my hometown is Warrensburg, Missouri, which is the home of the University of Central Missouri. And then we also have Whiteman Air Force Base, home of the B-2 bomber in Johnson County. Then we also have Howard County, Lafayette County, Carroll County, Saline County, Ray County, Livingston County, and Caldwell County. So quite a diverse geographic district depends on where you come from. I've got counties that are in mid-Missouri. I've got counties that are in west central Missouri. I've got counties that affiliate with northwest Missouri, and I've got counties that affiliate with Kansas City and the surrounding areas.
I imagine you have a lot of miles on your car having to visit everyone. Is that fair to say?
That is definitely fair to say. Usually about 30,000 miles a year.
Geez. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you were first elected to the House in 2008. You were actually House Speaker Pro Tem for a little bit. What got you interested in Missouri politics, and how did you get to this position where you're now a Missouri state senator?
I've always been interested in Missouri politics, and from the time when I went to Missouri Boys State at UCM, when I was in high school, and just always had an interest in politics. State Senator David Pierce, he was state representative at the time. He came to visit with him in a leadership group and just became further interested in state politics. And then State Senator David Pierce ran for state senate at the time. I ran for state representative. Out of 14,000 votes cast, I won by a landslide of 122 votes. So it was very close. And fortunately, I was reelected by my constituents and served 8 years in the House. And then I've been elected to the Senate in 2016 and served 2 years and do plan to run again for reelection in the year 2020. But I enjoy what I do in the Missouri State Senate and as well as the Missouri State House. I've always said it's not always about passing bills, but helping constituents. And I've been fortunate enough to hopefully I think my constituents believe I've been successful at both.
Talk about a couple of bills that you have sponsored recently, and I think with the first topic, you've actually sponsored a number of versions of this particular topic. It's legislation that would both legalize sports betting and also legalize what I think is being called video lottery or video slot machines that are seen throughout Illinois in gas stations. I want you to explain why you're doing this and kind of what the mindset behind this particular policy push is.
Yes, well, first, Senate Bill 43 does deal with video lottery terminals, and this, I believe, is the third year that I sponsored this legislation. So video lottery terminals, you see them in other states. They look like video poker machines. Illinois has approved and legalized those over the past several years. Basically, we have around 14,000 gray games or illegal video lottery, video poker machines in Missouri currently. We are not regulating or taxing these. I believe that my bill, which would provide there could be 5 in most bars, taverns, convenience stores, fraternal organizations, and truck stops, and then up to 10, I believe, in fraternal organizations as well as truck stops, but 5 for most other places that serve alcohol. It would generate up to $126 million or in once fully implemented, and that money would go toward education. And so I believe that it's a form of entertainment, and with new money coming to the state for education, and then 1/3, basically 32% of the tax would go to the state. 4% of the tax on these video lottery terminals would go to the local municipality, and then another 32% to the owner of the establishment that had the video lottery terminals, and another 32% of the revenue would go to the business where that was located. So it's been very successful in other states, and again, it would generate $126 million plus in net new revenue to the state.
And then what about the legalization of sports betting, which I think was made possible by, I believe, a U.S. Supreme Court decision last year, if I'm not mistaken?
That is correct. In May of 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that other states could have sports betting, a sports book. And it was pretty much a landmark case. Up until then, basically the only state that could do that is the state of Nevada. And for those listeners that have been to Las Vegas, they know about sportsbook. And if they want to bet on the St. Louis Cardinals or the Kansas City Chiefs or the Mizzou Tigers or the Kansas City Royals or the St. Louis Blues, they could do that in Las Vegas. So what my bill does, it legalizes sportsbook in the state of Missouri. And it's a lot more complicated than you would think. I know there's been another Supreme Court case, I believe, which talked about state-to-state gaming and things like that, so which disallowed state-to-state gaming. But what my bill does, would allow you to download an app, a sports betting app. The current version said that you would have to go to a casino to sign up for that app, and then you could bet anywhere in the state of Missouri. So if you wanted to make a bet on the St. Louis Blues from the comfort of your own home, or actually while you're at the Enterprise Arena, you could do that under my bill. It does have some other requirements as far as the taxes go. The taxes, 12% tax would go toward education. Currently, casinos pay a 21% tax on their table games and slot machines and things like that. So there would be a 12% tax that would go toward education. There would be a 2% administrative fee that would go toward the Veterans Capital Improvement Trust Fund for our veterans' homes and veterans' cemeteries here in the state of Missouri. And then there would also be part of that fee would go to the Gaming Commission to regulate sportsbook in the state of Missouri. And then there was also a 0.5% administrative fee that would go toward the Entertainment Infrastructure Fund. And what this fund is, it's very unique. I believe I'm the only one that's proposed this in the United States, but year after year we get requests from different facilities, and whether it's the Enterprise Arena in St. Louis, whether it's Jackson County Sports Authority for Arrowhead Stadium and Kauffman Stadium, whether it's for Mizzou Arena and or Faroe Field, we get requests all the time for money to be used to help with those different kinds of structures. What my sports book bill does with that 0.5 administrative fee, it would generate up to $5.3 million a year to help out with infrastructure. And what we mean by infrastructure is, I've always said that when I'm a fan, I want to make sure that the fans have a great experience getting to the game, and whether that means increased lighting around the stadium and the public streets around the stadium, better intersections so they can get to the stadium or entertainment facility quicker, and maybe a pedestrian overpass over a major highway so it doesn't block traffic when you've got a lot of fans going to the event. And then I want to make sure the fans have a great experience inside the entertainment facility. And I use sports stadiums, but this could also be used for concert halls and other amphitheaters and other entertainment facilities.
So I imagine that there's probably some pushback on various fronts to legalizing both of these things. I would assume casinos are not super pleased or excited about sports betting being legalized, and also video lotteries terminals being legalized too. What's been sort of the discourse you've heard so far on this issue?
Yes, the casinos have some concerns. Obviously, they have a different bill where the sports book would be taxed at 6.75% in the state of Missouri. Now, in other states, the other 7 to 8 states that have passed sports book and sports betting, the income tax rate ranges anywhere from 6.75% as the low, which I believe the state of Nevada has, all the way up to 51% tax, and I believe that's in the state of Rhode Island. So my provision calls, obviously, like I said, for a 12% tax plus a 2% administrative fee, and then plus a different 0.5% administrative fee to go toward the Entertainment Infrastructure Fund to be used to help for infrastructure improvements that at any of those entertainment and sporting facilities.
When I was talking with Representative Phil Cristofanelli, when we were talking about instituting like an internet sales tax, he talked about he would only be in favor of something like that if the proceeds were effectively used to pay for tax cuts. My question is this money going to go into these various funds you talked about, and then is the legislature going to cut out the funds and then use them for something else, basically supplanting? Or will this be additional money for education that could be used for other things, essentially?
Well, that's a great question. And this money will actually go toward education. Now, in the Senate and House appropriations, as well as the governor's budget, this would supplant general revenue. And so it would be up to the House and the Senate, as well as the governor's recommendations, whether or not this was on top of the amount of money that education currently receives. I know we have fully funded the foundation formula for the last few years, and we want to continue to fully fund the school foundation formula for K through 12. But my feeling has always been is if we can get a revenue source, or keep getting a revenue source that would hopefully fully fund the foundation without having to use any of general revenue, that would be my goal, and to have a funding source that would always come in that would go straight toward education, from the gaming, from the casinos, from video lottery terminals, like I said, video lottery terminals, $126 million toward education. The sports book and sports betting, they range anywhere from $12 million to $30 million for education. So the real pot of gold for public education definitely is the video lottery terminals. But ultimately, we as a legislature cannot bind future legislatures. And so ultimately it will come up as far as those appropriation bills every year, whether or not this would supplant or be on top of those education funding.
Let's talk about another bill that you've sponsored. It deals with effectively expanding the autism insurance mandate. What Senate bill is that again, before we talk about the substance?
Yes, this is Senate Bill 45.
Okay, so just as kind of a disclaimer before we talk about this, as people know when they listen to this show, I have a child with special needs. I've taken advantage of some insurance mandated coverage that has gone towards some sorts of therapies for my child. So this is not an issue that I'm completely unaffected by, but I think that it's an important enough issue to talk about on a platform like this in depth. So explain what your legislation does and why you think it's needed, because from looking at social media, I think the impetus behind this is that autism is covered and it's a required thing to be covered in insurance in Missouri, but other similar developmental disorders are not, and it's causing a lot of families to have to pay out of pocket for very costly coverage. That's what I assume the issue is, but if you want to explain it more in depth, I would like you to give you this opportunity.
Yes, most certainly. So 10 years ago, I served on a joint committee on autism disorders, and where we came up with an insurance mandate where insurance companies would have to cover autism treatment and autism therapy for those kids with autism. However, that mandate did not include kids with other physical or mental disabilities. Now, what we found is when children receive the proper therapy that they need for any of those disabilities at an early age, they have a greater chance of becoming an independent, healthy, happy adult, able to live on their own and function on their own later on in life. However, if these children do not receive the proper therapy for any of those disabilities, then they have less of a chance in order to be an independent living adult later on in life. And so there was definitely a disconnect there. So what Senate Bill 45 does, it piggybacks off of the current statute as far as covering other disabilities, especially for children, besides just the autism disorder. And we've had great testimony. We've been working with insurance companies on this. In fact, we have a compromise bill between the supporters of this legislation as well as the insurance companies. They had originally testified against Senate Bill 45, but through several talks and discussions and vetting of the bill, they have come on board and are not opposing Senate Bill 45 now, and it actually has been sent out to the Senate floor, and I'm hopeful for some good debate here over the next couple of weeks when it comes up on the Senate floor.
It's not surprising to me that insurance companies would have some reservations about this because a lot of the therapies for developmental disorders are very expensive. So I would have to imagine they had to come to the table, as you kind of alluded to. My question, though, is especially with a lot of developmental disorders like autism and things that are similar to autism being diagnosed at a higher rate and with a higher demand for the services that are mentioned in your bill, is there any concern that mandating this in insurance will cause a kind of shortage of suppliers of treatment? Because, I mean, one of the things that I've run into is that when I take my child to his particular therapy, they're so overbooked that they cannot possibly give additional hours for us. And I just wonder if that was one of the concerns when you put this forward, even though it will definitely reduce costs for families that could not afford this out of pocket. What have you heard about that particular part of this?
You know, I do realize that there is a shortage of therapy providers, and most certainly that is one of the concerns that came in as we were working on this bill. But actually, one of the main proponents of this bill, her son has autism, and so they're using the autism providers, but she wanted to make sure that those other types of disabilities were covered as well. And I think if this bill were to pass, yes, there will be a much higher demand, and so hopefully we can have more people that enter this field, and so they're able to provide these services as well. So maybe in the short term, there could be definitely a pinch as far as being able to get services, but in the long term effects of this legislation passing are tremendous, and definitely that's what we're focused on is the long term and having more providers that are able to provide this service, and then ultimately helping these kids lead healthy, fulfilled, independent lives once they become adults.
I'm interested in, and this is kind of an issue related to your legislation, but one of the things that
Yes.
I have found when I talk with people involved in the special education space, primarily the city of St. Louis, really struggling with funding and attracting personnel for students. I've heard it's an especially large problem in rural areas like you represent. Have you found from like diving into this issue, when you're talking about kids with developmental disabilities who then like go to public schools and need special education personnel attached to them, is that also a problem that you're finding in some of your local school districts? And is there any connection between this legislation and helping alleviate that, or is that an entirely different issue altogether?
That is kind of an entirely issue altogether, but I do know that our rural school districts are doing the best that they can with the resources they have to meet the needs of these children with these types of disabilities. I have had constituents move out of my rural district and to be closer to a bigger city where there are more options for therapy providers than in some of my rural counties. And so that has been a problem. And so that's definitely, we definitely do have a shortage of these providers now, and we need to try and focus on making sure that people enter into this field, and so there are more therapy options available. But yes, definitely in the rural areas, there is a sure lack of therapy providers.
Is there possibly a role for the state to provide additional funding to especially rural areas? Because one of the reasons I moved to St. Louis County, for example, is because we have the special school district there. There's a lot of money to hire personnel, and there's a large population paying into like one property tax bucket. I imagine in rural counties that's just not possible because A, there's not a lot of people, and B, a lot of people in rural counties are not wealthy. So is it possible that the state could create some sort of funding source or some sort of like special ed funding formula to help rural school districts or urban school districts that clearly don't have the resources or money to hire the personnel?
That is one option that we could consider. I guess I would differ with you on one thing, that most people in rural Missouri aren't wealthy. I think we do have quite a few wealthy as well as low-income people, just like the cities have. But as far as the resources that we have in rural Missouri, obviously we do have a lot of good school districts and a lot of good resources. However, because of the lack of population versus the city, we just don't have as many providers as you do in St. Louis or Kansas City or Springfield or Columbia would have. And so that's some of the struggles we face. And it's not just with therapy providers, but it's with doctors, dentists, speech pathologists, you name the professional medical field. And there's definitely a shortage in rural Missouri. And so that's something that we're very cognizant of. I know that there are some other programs, I believe, for some of the other medical professionals to encourage them to come to rural Missouri and live in small town rural life. And so you bring up a good point as far as maybe some of these therapists could qualify under some of those same medical programs if they go to a small or rural community.
Well, let's talk about a couple of issues that you may not be sponsoring, but are definitely going to be things you could be involved with. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is the prescription drug monitoring program. I believe that legislation was stalled in a Senate committee, but then passed out of it today when we're recording this. My understanding from talking to you before we press record is you're not a super fan of this type of program,
right,
and I want you to explain why.
Yes, as far as PDMPs, I am not a huge fan of creating another government database in order to legislate people's personal lives. And although Missouri is the only state that does not have a prescription drug monitoring program, and basically what this is if you were prescribed some sort of opioid, your name would go into a database, and then the pharmacies and doctors could look at that database to see how much you've been prescribed that particular drug, and when you were prescribed last. If you were red flagged, I'm not for sure exactly what the bill says if you were red flagged. So take, for example, 3 years ago, I had a root canal, I believe in December, and I was prescribed some opioids, some pain medicine. And then about a month later, I was prescribed some additional opioids for a back issue that I had. And if PDMP were law statewide, my name would have been on this different prescription drug monitoring program. I think that even though Missouri is the only state that does not have a PDMP program, we are ranked in the middle as far as opioid related abuse and deaths. And so when we've looked at many of these other states, the fact of the matter is that the PDMPs don't seem to be working. And we proposed, myself as well as some of my colleagues that aren't a big fan of the PDMP, we've proposed some alternatives throughout the past several years. One of those, I believe there's 8 to 10 states that have passed this, which would require doctors to discuss the effects of opioids and opioid abuse with the patient before prescribing that particular medicine. You would think that that would be common sense already, but they don't have to. And so if it was in state statute, they would have to sit down with their patient and describe that. We've also talked about not or making a patient pay with a credit card or debit card. So they would have the credit card would have that information. Most of these people that are pill shopping and are coming in possibly from other states or even in the state of Missouri, they're paying in cash. They don't want their name out there. We also have talked about different options where the prescription must come from a Missouri doctor. We want to also focus on the doctors who are over prescribing. Some of these doctors, and again, we've got a lot of good doctors, but some of these doctors are maybe working more like drug dealers where they're just writing prescriptions for these opioids and giving them out like candy to different people. And I've also heard on the opposite side of people that do have drug addict, or they feel, or they're not drug addicts, but they feel like drug addicts because the negative stigma that has been applied to opioids. I recently also had a staff member that had a root canal, and I've had 2 root canals myself. When I had a root canal, they did prescribe some hydrocodone as well as Oxycontin that I could take. And when my staff person went to have her root canal recently, they wouldn't prescribe her anything. They said, well, just go ahead and take ibuprofen. Well, I think just because of the negative stigma that opioids have right now, there's a lot more people in pain because doctors are becoming scared to prescribe any opioids. And that's an example, I believe, of some doctors that are basically under prescribing drugs because they're concerned about opioid abuse and things like that. So overall, I guess, I'm not a big fan of creating another database to monitor people's opioid use, but I know some of my colleagues obviously have filed bills in the House and the Senate, and hopefully we can come to a compromise of something that will work because, like I said, Missouri, you would expect, would be at the very bottom of the list since we're the only state that does not have a PDMP, but we're actually in the middle.
My big question for you on this is are you and some other opponents of PDMP willing to filibuster this to basically prevent anything from getting through the Senate, sort of like your former colleague, Senator Rob Schaaf did? Or is your goal here trying to use your objections to facilitate some sort of compromise that ends up passing and going to Governor Mike Parson? I mean, obviously, I don't know if you're going to give away your legislative strategy to me, although if you want to, that would be awesome. But what is kind of your mindset on what your posture is going to be when this comes to the floor?
I think that for any PDMP bill to be passed through the Senate, I'm not comfortable with the current legislation that is there. Is there a compromise possible? Maybe that there is. Some of those examples that I just talked about of other things besides PDP, I most certainly would want to try first. But I think that many of my colleagues have angst about passing PDP in the Senate. And so if and when that bill gets brought up on the Senate floor, I know there will be a lot of discussion on that. And whether or not there's a compromise there, I don't know yet.
In the last few minutes we have left, I want to ask you about your opinion about Governor Mike Parsons' major agenda points. Frankly, PDMP is one of the things that he wants to get passed, but I know that the things that he's talked about on the stump and in his State of the State address include bonding for bridges, workforce development programs, and I got to get a sense that those are not overt. Take away PDMP for a second, which I know does have some controversy attached to it. On its surface, it doesn't seem like bonding for bridges or workforce development programs are overly controversial. But I do know that there's been some angst over both of those things, and I'm curious about how you think those agenda items are gonna go through the Senate in the next couple of months with the legislature kind of reaching its halfway point.
I think the governor's definitely launched a lot of bold initiatives, and he's really put a lot of time, energy, and effort in trying to come up with ways in order to move the state forward. I know the bonding issue where he would spend, or the state of Missouri would have $350 million in bonds to do bridge projects all over the state. However, that would cost the state $450 million over the next 15 years. So basically, we're going to get $350 million in bridge projects for $450 million. I do have some concerns about bonding for those particular types of projects. The state of Missouri, we are expected to have at a surplus at the end of this year about $625 million, of which I know the governor set aside about $125 million out of the $625 million for things that that could come up over this next year. And so out of that $500 million carryover, I would hope that we could find and use some of that $500 million carryover into the next fiscal year to use for bridge and road projects. I'm not totally against the bonding proposal that the governor has, but I look forward to working with the governor and trying to come up with a compromise there in order to fund these bridges and infrastructure projects with whether that's part bonding and part savings that we're realizing in general revenue. The current year budget is about $28 billion, and that's billion with a B for the state of Missouri. The governor's proposal for next year calls for a $30 billion spending plan, and so an increase of $2 billion between this year and next year. So we're just, myself as well as some of my colleagues are just trying to look at different options to see if there's other ways that we could fund some of these infrastructure improvements. We've had conversations with the governor as well as his staff, and they have been open and about any other ideas that we would have. And so that's kind of what we're searching for now. I know the governor's very focused on workforce development as well, and most certainly we want to do that. He has several different programs out there that we're considering. One is Fast Track, which would allow for men or women that are over the age of 25 to go to college or get a certificate or go to tech school or to learn a new skill or trade, and whether that's welding or get your QuickBooks certificate or nursing. It all sounds great. I know that that program expects to cost around $20 million to the state of Missouri. So we want to make sure that your taxpayer dollars are being used wisely. And so he has several bold initiatives, and right now we're looking through those and seeing where we can agree, and if we disagree on some of those, seeing where we have common ground in order to hopefully move some of those initiatives forward.
Well, Senator, I know that the Senate is actually in session right now dealing with important legislation, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for taking time out of your afternoon to talk with me. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. I believe that you can be followed on Twitter at DL Hoskins. Is that correct?
That is correct, at DL Hoskins.
Thank you very much. Until next time, so long.
Who's looking good today? Who's looking good in every way? No star rookie. You better watch, don't mess with me. No money man can win my love. It's sweetness that I'm thinking of. Always hang in the buffalo stance. We do the dive every time we dance.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.